The desert had a way of making a man feel small, but that night it made Eli Turner feel hunted. His farm sat alone at the edge of the Arizona territory, where the land cracked under the sun and the wind carried stories older than the fences he'd built with his own hands. Eli was not a warrior, not a gunman, not a legend. He was just a farmer, quiet, scarred by loss, and stubborn enough to believe the land could still be tamed by patience instead of bullets. When the knocking came, it wasn't fear that froze him. It was instinct. 3 shadows stood beyond his door, tall and unmoving, framed by moonlight. When he opened it, the firelight revealed them clearly. 3 Apache women, towering, strong, wrapped in leather and woven cloth, their eyes sharp as flint. They carried no weapons in their hands, but power sat in their posture like a drawn bow. The tallest stepped forward. "You will sleep with me tonight," she said. Her voice was not soft. It was not cruel either. It was a statement, heavy, final. Eli swallowed. Not from desire, from confusion. "I don't understand," he said quietly. The second woman spoke then, her gaze calmer, almost sorrowful. "You will not be alone tonight. If you are, you will die before morning." The third said nothing. She only watched him the way one watches a storm forming on the horizon. They explained in fragments. Soldiers were coming. Raiders too. The land had chosen him without asking. His farm sat on a crossing point, old Apache ground, marked by blood and promise. The spirits were restless, and men with guns followed restless land. Eli laughed once, bitter and tired. "I don't have anything worth killing for." The tallest woman stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the scars on her arms, proof of survival, not decoration. "You have a future," she said. "That is why they will come." Against his better judgment, he let them in. They did not touch him. They did not threaten him again. They built the fire higher, checked the doors, and spoke in low voices he did not understand. The woman who had spoken first sat near him, her presence solid, grounding. "You said I'd sleep with you," Eli finally said. She met his eyes without shame. "Yes, sleep, share warmth, share breath. Nothing more than what you choose." Outside, the wind howled. That night they lay near the fire, backs turned, bodies close enough to fight. The cold, but far enough to respect the space between strangers. Eli did not sleep easily, but he slept alive. And before dawn, gunfire echoed across the desert. Chapter 2. The attack came hard and fast. Riders stormed the edge of the property, rifles cracking the silence. Eli barely had time to reach for his shotgun before the Apache women moved like lightning. They did not fight recklessly. They fought with knowledge, using terrain, shadows, and timing learned from a land that raised warriors, not killers. Eli fired when he had to. He survived because they stood. When the dust settled, 2 riders lay wounded, and the rest fled. Silence returned, thick and heavy with consequence. The tallest woman approached him again. Her strength had not changed, but something softer lived behind her eyes now. "You are alive because you listened," she said. Eli looked at the broken fence, the rising sun, the blood soaking into the earth. "You saved my life." She shook her head. "You saved your own. We only stood with you." That morning they told him the truth. Their people were scattered. The world was changing, and land like this would soon be swallowed by railroads and laws written by men who never bled for it. They needed an ally, not a master, not a husband forced by fear, but a man willing to share space, food, and future. "You said I'd sleep with you," Eli said again, this time with a small smile. She smiled too, just once. "And you did. You lived." The women stayed that day, then another, then many. The farm changed. The land healed. Eli learned their names, their stories, their laughter. What began as survival became trust. What began as fear became family. And on some nights, when the fire burned low and the wind carried old songs across the plains, Eli remembered those words, not as a command, but as a promise that life could still choose you when you least expect it. The desert did not forget, but it learned to breathe again, and Eli felt it each morning when the sun rose gentle instead of cruel, when the soil held water instead of dust, when the farm sounded alive with footsteps that were no longer his alone. because the three Apache women had become part of the land's rhythm, moving with purpose, working without complaint, guarding without pride, and teaching Eli that survival was not domination but balance. And as days turned into weeks, the memory of gunfire faded into a lesson rather than a wound. For Nayeli stood watch, at dawn, with eyes trained on the horizon, not out of fear, but responsibility. Sani healed fences and hearts alike with quiet words and steady hands, and Isha learned the fields as if reading an old book written in dirt and wind. And when a government scout returned with questions sharp as knives, Eli did not stand before him as a lone farmer anymore. He stood as a man chosen by circumstance and bound by trust, answering calmly, refusing politely, drawing a line that did not need a gun to be understood. And the scout left uneasy because some places could not be measured by maps or owned by ink. And that night the fire burned higher, as if the stars leaned closer to listen. And the women sang low songs that carried grief, without bitterness and hope without promise. Songs of journeys taken with empty hands and returned with full hearts. And Eli felt belonging settle in him like a truth he had always known, but never named. And when Nayeli sat beside him, closer than before, she spoke of the first night not as a demand, but as a test, saying the land watches how a man chooses when fear knocks, whether he reaches for control or courage. And Eli answered without hesitation that he chose to stay, to listen, to share the night rather than conquer it. And in that answer, the future opened not as certainty, but as possibility. Because the West was changing and would keep changing, bringing rails and laws and men who mistook noise for strength. Yet this farm had become a refuge carved from patience, defended by unity and grounded in respect. And as the fire died low and the wind carried old stories across the fields, Eli understood that legends were not born only from battles or blood, but from strangers who refused to be enemies, from nights survived together, from promises kept without witnesses. Change came the way storms do on the plains, first as a distant pressure in the air, then as a certainty no fence could stop. And Eli sensed it before anyone spoke of it, in the way riders passed closer to the property, in the rumors carried by traders, in the sound of the ground itself tightening under the weight of what was coming, because the railroad was crawling westward like an iron promise, and a threat all at once, and with it came men who believed land was silent until claimed. And one evening a group of armed settlers arrived, polite at first, smiling with the confidence of numbers, offering papers and money and words that sounded fair until you listened closely. And Eli listened closely, standing with Nayeli, Sani, and Isha at his side, not behind him. And when he refused, the smiles thinned, because refusal was a language they did not respect. And that night the women prepared without panic, checking lines of sight, moving animals, teaching Eli how to see darkness, not as absence but as cover. And when the settlers returned before dawn, louder and less patient, they found a place that did not yield. Shots rang out, but none found their mark. Warnings were enough. Shadows answered every movement. And fear finally taught those men what words could not, that some ground remembers who protects it. And when silence returned again, heavier but clean, Eli felt the cost of standing firm, yet also the reward, because the women did not celebrate victory. They honored endurance, tending the land, mending what was broken, and reminding him that survival was not about winning, but continuing. And days later, an elder from their people arrived quietly, speaking of alliances and paths forward, of sharing harvests and knowledge so the future would have more doors than walls. And Eli agreed, knowing the farm had grown beyond him, becoming a meeting place where respect had weight. And on a clear night beneath a sky thick with stars, Nayeli spoke of staying not for safety alone, but for purpose. Sani spoke of healing what had been divided, and Isha spoke of children yet unborn who would know both soil and story. And Eli realized then that the legend was no longer about the night fear knocked, but about what followed, about choosing again and again to stand together when the world pushed, to pull them apart. And if this chapter stirred something in you,